our last presentation. I want to start by thanking Department of Climate Change, Energy and Environment and Water for the invitation for a group of us to speak here today, and also to thank the Department of Industry, Science and Resources and my very own Atlantic Fellow, of which I am a fellow, for supporting me to attend COP28. As is customary for me as a First Nations person from Australia, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this country on which we're meeting on today. I recognise and pay my respects to the diverse cultural heritage and traditions of the local people here in the UAE, and acknowledge First Nations people who have lived on and cared for this country for millennia. I'd also like to acknowledge and pay my respects to First Nations people from around the world who are here with us today, and to say a fond hello to my Lowitja Institute staff back home, and also to welcome our allies to this presentation. I'm a proud Narungagana woman from the Yorke Peninsula in South Australia, and I'm also the CEO of the Lowitja Institute, which is Australia's only national Aboriginal community-controlled health research institute. Before I go any further in my presentation, I'd like to tell you a little bit about us at the Lowitja Institute. We were named in honour of our patron, an amazing woman, Dr. Lowitja O'Donoghue. She's actually 93 years old now, and we're very lucky to still have her with us. She was and is an amazing Aboriginal female leader, and I'm going to be talking a bit about our Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander women today. As a community-controlled organisation, our work is led by our communities. This means they help determine our priorities, and they absolutely help us to guide our work, ensuring that everything we do is focused on the bettering the health and wellbeing of Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander peoples. Our work is born out of the need to negate deficit discourse research. That is research that is done on and about us and then used against us, or research that's done by non-Indigenous researchers to progress their own profession, and us to never see the reports or have the impact from that research in the light of day. Historically and recently, we've largely been locked out of that research process, and our knowledges, as you've heard over the last couple of days, have not been valued or respected. There were thoughts of our knowledges as illegitimate and not being scientific enough. Therefore, our work at the Lowitja Institute is focused on changing this narrative by supporting and growing the First Nations health research workforce, and that's done through online training. We offer scholarships, and of course through our membership we offer a connectedness. By ensuring that our research that we fund is research that our communities want, and that our funded research grants are First Nations led, and led by our communities, our organisations and our researchers. And that knowledge translation is actually thought about at the inception of our work, and so we're thinking about the end users before we even start doing the work. And I'm really pleased to say that of the 40 Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander health research grants that we've commissioned out through the Lowitja Research Institute, 100% of them are led by our Black academics. And of course, we are an advocacy and policy think tank body, translating our knowledges and research into policy and programs that better serve our communities. And you just heard Jed Carney launch our climate and health plan, and of course Lowitja Institute was a part of creating that plan, and we're very proud of that. In 2019 and 2020, like many of you in the room, our communities saw flooding, we saw hail the size of golf balls, we saw fire and extreme temperatures all in one season. Our community and our boards knew we needed to act. Hence, climate and health became a policy priority for us at the Lowitja Institute. We know as First Nations people that we contribute the least to climate change, and yet we will be the most impacted. And it's a fact that was actually highlighted in this year's IPCC report. At the Lowitja Institute, we understand that climate change is a direct result of colonisation. It is causing destruction of our lands, sacred sites and our ways of life. It threatens our cultural heritage and of course our traditional knowledges, and it has a profound impact on the social and the cultural determinants of our health and wellbeing. Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander peoples survive and thrive because of our connections to land. Our connection to land is determined by our law. So me as an Urungagana woman, my geographical location tells me what my law is. It comes from my country. It gives me my language. It gives me my relationships to people at home and people wherever I travel around the globe. It gives me my role in my community, in my ceremony, and of course, very much so in my family. The practice of passing this knowledge on through generations is called cultural maintenance. And it's really, really key to keeping culture strong. How cultural maintenance happens is different from community to community and relationship to relationship. Sometimes you'll be given all the information all at once. Other times, in terms of cultural understanding, it's something that's very gradual and it's a slow burn. However, when these connections and these practices are disrupted, when ingredients for these practices are gone forever, it impacts our health significantly. And one example that we have in Australia is when missions were set up, and so segregation was absolutely a part of our history. And we saw that when our people were put onto missions, when we weren't allowed to speak our language, when we weren't allowed to do our medicine, that we became ill. Being able to uphold our culture keeps us healthy then. These are the cultural determinants of our health, and these must be considered in policy. They are foundational to achieving equitable social determinants of health, and this has been recognised in Article 24 of the UNDRIP. And they are absolutely foundational to us achieving the UN SDGs. Climate change presents an urgent risk to the cultural determinants of our health, and this will have disproportionate and devastating impacts on all First Nations peoples, but particularly our women, our babies and our children. In recent weeks, the WHO, or the World Health Organization, and the United Nations Children's Fund, along with the United Nations Population Fund, jointly called for systemic action to protect pregnant women and babies and children from the extreme health risks posed by climate change. As noted in their recent statement, the research shows that there are multiple cases and causes of maternal and neonatal morbidity and mortality, including, but not limited to, gestational diabetes, hypertensive disorders, preterm birth, low birth weight, and of course, stillbirth. The statement makes it clear that these risks are only going to be exacerbated by climate change and of course, by extreme heat. These risks are also, when I read them out, terrifyingly familiar. Over the period of 2014 to 2018, the main causes of death for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander babies and young children were complications of pregnancy and birth. Complications, and here's the echo, such as birth trauma, fetal growth disorders, hypertension and diabetes. First Nations babies and our children die at twice the rate of non-Indigenous babies, and that's in any town in Australia. The mortality rate for 0 to 4-year-olds was 2.1 times the rate of non-Indigenous children in 2015 to 2019. So very recent statistics. Our babies continue to be born underweight, and our women live on average 8 years less than non-Indigenous women. Maternal health is a key driver for those statistics. And then in the spirit of what I talked about here earlier today, if you're able to catch me speaking on deficit discourse, we shouldn't take all of that and call our women, children and babies vulnerable. They're not vulnerable. We are extremely adaptable people. We should be called a priority. And when our women already live in poor housing and extreme heat in places like Central Australia, the threat to First Nations families, our people, our very 3% population, and into the future, these statistics are going to be heart-wrenching. The Australian Government has committed under SDG 3 targets to protecting mothers, children and reducing mortality rates. This work must include First Nations mothers and our children and requires a multifaceted approach. There's no one silver bullet that's going to fix this. Our peoples have survived for centuries. Centuries of, and I want to say this, we survived for centuries, but a lot of this comes back to Terra Nullius, the irony of Terra Nullius, that there was no one there, and that's what our country might end up being, no one there. But we've survived centuries of systemic racism, economic and social exclusion, and intergenerational trauma. And as a result, our peoples now die far earlier and experience a higher burden of disease, disability, poverty, and criminalisation than other Australians. These are the long-term impacts and ongoing impacts of colonisation, and they will be compounded by climate change, widening the gap in health outcomes even further than what they are now, and leaving those we value most, our future generations, our babies, most at risk. This is the backdrop of the work we must do together. And also in the backdrop, and I have to say it, is the recent result of Australia's referendum. And I'll talk more about that soon. In 2021, we, the Lowitja Institute, published papers on the cultural determinants of health, and importantly, on climate and Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people's health. This and Lowitja Institute's other climate papers can be actually downloaded via this QR code, and I'll show it again at the end. And we've also got some materials over here that you might like to take with you. It highlights much of what we've already said here today, and I have to acknowledge Amber, who will probably speak a little bit about the report afterwards. She was one of our main writers. But it also warns of the impacts of climate change on our Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander community-controlled health services. And we heard Minister Carney just say earlier about primary health care. So many of our services are primary healthcare services. So in the mitigation strategies that we all talk about, absolutely these services need to be included, but these services are already struggling to operate in extreme heat and with a reduced workforce. We must focus on supporting our health services to manage the impacts of climate change, extreme heat, and major weather events, and adapt quickly. The health of our people absolutely depends on it. So I encourage governments to work with us and invest in supporting our services to protect our communities. Earlier this year, I had the honour of delivering an intervention at the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues in New York, and I called for governments to heal the deep relational wounds between nation states and Indigenous peoples through truth-telling. And that's not just, as one of my board members told me just yesterday, Craig Ritchie, it's not just historical truth-telling and all of the bad things of the past, but it's truth-telling about how deadly our Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people are. Through decolonisation, and of course, if you know me, then you know I'll talk about anti-racism strategies. I also called on nation states to fully implement the UNDRIP and to convene a meeting to discuss decolonised approaches and actions to adaptation and mitigation of climate change impacts. This is imperative to ensure self-determination as described and stated in Article 3 of the UNDRIP. As our communities continue to move forward after the unsuccessful Voice referendum, whilst we are all still in grief, it is more important now than ever that the Australian Government takes every opportunity to elevate our voices and our leadership. So again, I ask that governments commit to working alongside of us. As Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people, we hold a deep knowledge of this country, and we've always seen that link between health and climate. Our leadership, therefore, is vital. We can no longer wait for climate action. That's kind of in the rear view mirror. Many communities are already noticing significant changes to ecosystems. For example, the biodiversity loss that we are seeing on country, and that means that for people living on country and doing traditional hunting and fishing, it means that not only is the practice disappearing, but their food is disappearing. The economic loss of livelihood that actually brings as well, and the loss of totems, also known as biodiversity, that has cultural and spiritual impacts. In Tennant Creek in Central Australia lives one of my friends, Norman Frank Japarula, and his family. They advocated for years to get solar panel on their house after a life-threatening episode when Norman's power went off due to extreme heat, and his insulin was therefore made unusable. Norman also talked about a waterhole that had been in his dreaming and had been in his songlines for centuries. It had never not been there. And all of a sudden, over the space of 5 years, that waterhole dried up. That might seem insignificant, but what that also meant was that animals didn't come anymore. And so therefore, the local grocery store was gone. It took advocacy from many different sources and more than 6 months for the governments to correct that one wire from those solar panels into Norman's house so that he could at least have refrigeration. And now Norman's doing something about it himself because he's the only one in that community that actually has solar panels, and he started this little advocacy group here. So I want to highlight it because if there's anyone in the room that's connected, to people that would like to give resources to such an important cause, please look Norman up. Governments and mainstream institutions in academia need to recognise First Nations knowledges and the wisdom that we have as scientific, and it needs to be valued. We've been doing environmental science for millennia. Observational science is a part of our everyday life, and this is central to our connection to our country. We've always known we are a part of, not external to, our ecosystems, and we deeply understand our roles. And I underscore this word, look it up, custodians of country. We don't own it, we actually look after it. The methodologies that we've developed and passed through generations have kept country and our communities absolutely thriving. Colonisation sought to erase these practices, disrupt these connections. Colonisation of our seasons is just one example. So contrary to some people's belief, colonisation was not good for us. Part of our healing, part of our decolonisation work that must be undertaken is elevating Indigenous researchers and our scientists. Researchers like the amazing Nona, who you'll hear from shortly. Our leadership in this space is unique and important because we take a holistic approach. Last month we met with government ministers, the amazing Jed Carney, who was here, Minister McAllister and Senators Stewart and Cox. And we sat with them to advocate for the establishment of an Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander coalition on climate and health, a collective advocacy mechanism which we believe will elevate our voices and allow for leadership and self-determination in this space. We also recently published a paper with additional detail other than what I'm saying here today, and you can download this publication using our QR code, which is on the screen right here, and find out more, and perhaps we'd love it if you could offer our support. And for our global brothers and sisters, it's about sharing with you and potentially learning from the journey that we've had. The key takeaway here is that to achieve health equity, as we are committed to under the UN SDGs, we must understand and know power and how to share it. We must understand equity. We must know that treating everyone the same doesn't get the same outcome because we don't all start from the same place. We must know that a blanket cookie-cutter approach does not honour and value us as First Nations people and see and respect our diversity as First Nations peoples. I'll leave you all with this image from our recent Lowitja Institute conference. We had more than 1,000 First Nations people from all around the world descend on our conference, sharing knowledge and insight, and it was a really powerful space to be in. And one of our themes was climate and health. And you actually have a chance to be with us at our conference, which is in 2025 on my country in Adelaide. I'd also encourage you all to look at our website and save this date if you're interested in further supporting our work and us helping you elevate your work. We believe our conferences demonstrate the depths and strengths of our peoples, our black excellence, our intellect, our knowledge and our voices, and our unyielding dedication to the health of country and to our planet. The events and gatherings that I've been a part of this week with other First Nations people have demonstrated just the same, which leaves me with some hope for the future. I'll now hand it over to Francis, who is one of our amazing black academics, to talk to you about what it is to work with the Lowitja Institute and do research our way. Thanks, Francis.
Thank you, Janine. Absolutely amazing work that Lowitja Institute does and gives opportunities for myself. My name is Francis Nona. I work at the Karumba Institute for QUT, which is Queensland University of Technology, and really pushing black knowledge, really taking to the forefront of what it is to see the world as a black academic. The work that I've now since undertaken, is a rights-based approach. So a rights-based approach to climate change action, working together for a better future. I want to give a shout out to my team, Veronica Matthews from the University of Sydney with Lillian Ireland, and Chris and Nina Lansbury from University of Queensland. The reason this work came about is to start building a coalition with the Federal Government of Australia to work together and give voices to community. A rights-based approach is to avoid us taking the government to court of not having a voice and what are the mitigations for what's happening on our country. So as we've done this work, we started to see, but before I can go forward, I want to highlight the importance of a reminder for what Australia's obligations are under international law to First Nations people in the face of climate change. The right to health is the right to the enjoyment of the highest attainable standard of physical and mental health. Article 12 of the International Covenant of Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. Rights to self-determination and the protection of culture. United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People. Rights of a healthy country through our carbon emissions reduction commitments. 43% below 2005 levels by 2030. And the Convention of Biological Diversity in our ecosystems. Key principles consistent across all human rights conventions and frameworks, that they are exercised without discrimination, that stakeholders are meaningfully involved in all phases of planning and implementation, that they are a transparency in decision making, and governments are answerable to observance of human rights. For climate crisis, these principles translate into information sharing, active participation of communities in equitable decision making to develop climate solutions. We can make a valuable contribution from our unique knowledge and need to be at the decision-making table. I show you two case studies, and the first case study is what is happening, what are we forced to do? And when we think of Torres Straits and the changing landscape, and you know, the landscape's changing so quick, we talk about the canary in the coal mine. Well, Torres Strait is becoming the canary, and when the canary dies, we have to evacuate. And is that fair to practice culture on the lands of millennia of our ancestors? So we've had cases within Torres Straits, you know, the unseasonal changes, extreme weathers, drinking water contamination, disrupted food supply chains, sea level rise, changing conditions for infectious diseases, contaminated drinking water. And when we think of this, what are we losing? What are we losing as we see in these changes? Climate impacts on culture. Can't practice your culture to hunt and fish and teach future generations. Our sea country is changing. The turtle changing gender, and land country is changing. Land disappearing, sea level rise. So this forces the action we are taking. This time has come to talk straight rather than step around it. The climate is changing faster than the policies, and my people are the recipients of the lack of inaction. There's court cases going over within the Australian courts. The Torres Strait 8 case to the UN Human Rights Committee ruled in favour of Torres Straits, interfering rights to culture, rights to practice, and we are now seeing a second case from Torres Straits where Saibai and Boigu elders are now in the courts in Melbourne. When we think of the success of what does it look like to have a coalition with First Nations people, having a voice at the table, I bring you to two case studies external to Australia. Where can this work, and what are the strengths that we can pull from it? Indigenous leadership in the Arctic, warming considerably faster than other parts of the world. The Inuit Circumpolar Council in the late 1970s, representing approximately 180,000 Inuits of Alaska, Canada, Greenland, and Chakotay, with a united voice on issues of common concern, stood up to big oil companies for the past 50 years. The Inuit unity has helped conserve the Arctic environment for future generations and collectively insert all Inuit into the plans and policy making process. This is the success of working alongside First Nations people. The Sami Council, appointed a 4-year term, will be a platform for genuine dialogue between the holders of traditional Sami knowledge and the scientific community. The Council's work will be important to find solutions to the challenges posed to the Sami community by climate change and the loss of biodiversity. These are the successes as we see a rights-based approach to practice culture, practice our inherited knowledges. Indigenous knowledges is a resource and an opportunity. Knowledge for adaptation, much to be gained in partnership. Who is sitting at the table and whose table are we sitting at? Sit at Mob's table. Learn from the rich history that is passed down. We know what our people and country need. Wouldn't you rather be sitting making decisions with us rather than defending yourselves in the courtroom? It is time for Australia to catch up to other countries. In closing, Miniki Meso, in my language, a very big thank you for giving me the opportunity. Eso. I will pass over to Amber Rose, who is beyond her years in leadership, her leadership in research, her leadership in advocacy. Amber Rose, if you want to come and join us for your presentation, she led in partnership for the 2021 Lowitja discussion paper. So, thank you.
Hi everyone. Let me get my notes ready. Okay. Oh, okay. Thanks. Awesome. Okay. Actually, I need to grab my phone so I can time myself because honestly, I always end up talking like way over time. So hold on. Okay, Ginigay Nyara, Nyam Amber Rose, Nyam Gumbengi and Yami.